Automating your personal finances. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one of the most powerful but underused strategies in personal finance: automating your finances. If you want to save more, pay off debt faster, and reduce financial stress without having to rely on willpower every single day, then this video is for you. Many people struggle with managing their money consistently. They might have good intentions to save, invest, or pay off debt, but they often forget, get busy, or simply don't follow through. This is completely normal. Managing money manually requires ongoing effort and decision-making. And when life gets busy, these tasks often get pushed aside. Automating your finances can help solve this problem by removing the need to make the same financial decisions over and over again. In today's video, I'm going to explain what financial automation is, why it's so effective, and how you can start automating different parts of your financial life. We'll go through practical steps, real-life examples, tools you can use, and common mistakes to avoid. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of how to set up systems that help you manage your money more consistently and with less stress. So if you're ready to make your finances work more automatically, let's get started. First, let's talk about what automating your finances actually means. Financial automation refers to setting up systems that handle your money-related tasks without requiring constant manual effort from you. This can include automatically transferring money to savings, paying bills on time, investing regularly, or even sending money to different accounts based on rules you've set up in advance. The main idea behind automation is simple. Instead of relying on yourself to remember and take action every time, you create systems that do these things for you automatically. This approach can be very powerful because it reduces the amount of mental energy and decision-making required to manage your money well. One of the biggest benefits of automating your finances is that it helps you follow through on your financial goals more consistently. Many people know what they should be doing with their money: saving a certain amount, investing regularly, or paying off debt, but they struggle to do these things consistently over time. By automating these actions, you make them happen automatically, which greatly increases the likelihood that you'll actually follow through. Automation also helps reduce decision fatigue. Every time you have to decide whether to save money, pay a bill, or transfer funds to an investment account, you're using mental energy. Over time, this can add up and make it harder to stay consistent. When you automate these decisions, you free up mental space for other things in your life. Another important benefit is that automation can help you avoid late fees and missed payments. When your bills are paid automatically, you don't have to worry about forgetting to pay something on time. This can save you money and reduce stress at the same time. Now let's talk about what parts of your finances you can actually automate. There are many different areas where automation can be helpful. And the more you automate, the less you have to think about managing your money on a daily or weekly basis. One of the most common and effective things to automate is your savings. Instead of trying to remember to transfer money to your savings account every month, you can set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your savings account on payday. This way, you save money without having to think about it or make a decision each time. You can also automate your investments. If you want to invest a certain amount of money every month, you can set up automatic contributions to your investment accounts. This is often called dollar cost averaging, and it can be an effective long-term investing strategy. By automating your investments, you remove the temptation to try to time the market and ensure that you're consistently building your investment portfolio over time. Another area where automation is very useful is paying bills. Setting up automatic bill payments for your rent, utilities, insurance, loans, and other recurring expenses can help you avoid late fees and reduce the mental load of remembering to pay everything on time. Most banks and service providers make it easy to set up automatic payments. And doing so can give you peace of mind knowing that your important bills will be paid without you having to take action each month. You can also automate transfers between different accounts based on specific rules. For example, you could set up a system where a certain percentage of your income automatically goes into different accounts for different purposes, one for savings, one for investments, one for bills, and so on. This type of automation can help you manage your money according to a clear plan without having to make these decisions manually every time you get paid. Now let's talk about how to actually start automating your finances. The process doesn't have to be complicated, but it does require some initial setup and planning. The first step is to get a clear picture of your current financial situation. Before you start automating, it's helpful to understand your income, your regular expenses, and your financial goals. This will help you decide what to automate and how much to automate. The second step is to identify which parts of your finances would benefit most from automation. Start with the areas that are most important or that you struggle with the most. For many people, this includes saving, investing, and paying bills on time. Once these core areas are automated, you can gradually add more automation over time. The third step is to actually set up the automation. This usually involves logging into your bank accounts, investment accounts, and bill payment systems and setting up recurring transfers or payments. Most financial institutions make this process relatively straightforward, and many of them have guides or customer support to help you through the setup. When setting up automation, it's important to start with amounts and frequencies that are realistic for your situation. If you try to automate too much too quickly, you might find that you don't have enough money left in your checking account for daily expenses. It's usually better to start conservatively and increase the automated amounts over time as you become more comfortable with the system. It's also a good idea to regularly review your automated systems. Life changes, and your financial situation and goals may change over time as well. Reviewing your automation setup every few months can help ensure that it still aligns with your current needs and objectives. Now let's look at some real-life examples of people who have benefited from automating their finances. Rachel is a 31-year-old project manager. She used to struggle with saving money consistently because she would often forget or decide to spend the money on other things. After setting up an automatic transfer of $300 from her checking account to her savings account on the same day she gets paid, she was able to build her emergency fund to over $5 within a year and a half without having to think about it much. Thomas is a 38-year-old teacher who wanted to start investing but kept putting it off because he felt like he didn't know enough or didn't have enough money. He decided to start small by setting up an automatic monthly contribution of $100 to a low-cost index fund. Over time, as he became more comfortable with investing and his income increased, he gradually increased the automated amount. Today, he has a substantial investment portfolio that he built almost entirely through consistent automatic contributions. Lisa is a 29-year-old graphic designer who used to stress about paying her bills on time. She would often forget to pay one bill or another and end up with late fees. After setting up automatic payments for all of her recurring bills, including rent, utilities, phone, and insurance, she no longer has to worry about missing payments or paying late fees. This automation has reduced her financial stress significantly. These examples show that automation can be applied in different ways depending on your goals and situation. The common thread is that by setting up systems that work automatically, these people were able to make consistent progress on their financial goals with less ongoing effort. Of course, automating your finances also has some potential downsides that are worth being aware of. One possible issue is that if you automate too much, you might not pay enough attention to your finances overall. While automation can reduce the need for constant monitoring, It's still important to review your accounts regularly to make sure everything is working as expected and to stay aware of your overall financial situation. Another potential downside is that automation can sometimes make it harder to adjust your financial behavior when needed. If everything is on autopilot, you might be less likely to notice when your spending habits are changing or when you need to make adjustments to your budget. It's still important to stay engaged with your finances even when many things are automated. It's also worth noting that not everything can or should be automated. Some financial decisions require active thought and consideration, and it's important to maintain some level of awareness and control over your money. Automation works best when it's used strategically for the parts of your finances that benefit from consistency and repetition, while still leaving room for intentional decision-making where it matters most. Before we wrap up, let me share some common mistakes people make when trying to automate their finances. The first mistake is trying to automate everything at once. It can be tempting to set up automation for every part of your finances immediately. But this can sometimes lead to problems if you haven't fully thought through the amounts and timing. It's usually better to start with a few key areas and gradually expand your automation over time. The second mistake is not leaving enough money in your checking account for daily expenses. If you automate large transfers to savings or investments without making sure you have enough left for your regular spending, you might end up overdrawing your account or having to transfer money back. Always make sure your automated systems leave you with enough for your day-to-day needs. The third mistake is setting up automation and then completely ignoring your finances. While automation can reduce the amount of time you need to spend managing your money, it's still important to check in periodically to make sure everything is working correctly and to stay aware of your overall financial progress. The fourth mistake is not updating your automation when your life changes. If your income, expenses, or financial goals change, your automated systems might need to be adjusted as well. Regularly reviewing and updating your automation setup can help ensure it continues to serve your needs effectively. Alright, let's do a quick summary of what we covered in this video. We talked about what financial automation is and why it can be such a powerful tool for managing your money more consistently. We discussed the different areas of your finances that can be automated, including savings, investments, and bill payments. We explored how to set up automation in a practical and sustainable way. And we looked at real-life examples of people who have benefited from automating their finances. Finally, we covered common mistakes to avoid and the importance of staying engaged with your finances even when using automation. Automating your personal finances can be one of the most effective ways to make consistent progress on your financial goals while reducing stress and decision fatigue. When you set up systems that work automatically, you free up time and mental energy while also increasing the likelihood that you'll actually follow through on your financial intentions. If this video was helpful for you, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I'm creating this personal money management series to help you improve your financial habits with practical advice. There are more videos coming, so make sure you're subscribed if you want to continue learning. Also, let me know in the comments what parts of your finances you've already automated or what you're planning to automate next. I love hearing about your experiences and strategies. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I hope this video gave you some practical ideas for using automation to manage your money more effectively. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and have a great day.